Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the virtual public informational meeting for state project number 41-121, which is the replacement of bridge number 00853, carrying Route 16 over the Salmon River in East Hampton, Connecticut. Next slide, please. My name is Francisco Fadul, and I'm a transportation supervising engineer with the Connecticut Department of Transportation for this project. We hope that everyone finds this presentation informative and that we'll be able to address any questions or concerns that you may have. I would like to thank the town manager, David Cox, for cooperating with our team back in August to discuss this project and to help tonight's meeting happen. For joining us tonight, there are several options. One of them through Zoom is the option to view captions or subtitles. To turn on this feature, select the Show Captions button or the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Then select Speak in Language button, and then select the desired language. So before we get started with the main presentation, just wanted to walk us through some goals and format for tonight's meeting. First, I will introduce the project team, including the department leadership and our consultant liaison and design teams, and also explain the way to interact with us during the meeting. Then we will have the technical portion of this presentation, which is going to include the condition of the existing structure, purpose and need for the project, and the recommended design, which has currently progressed to a 30% level. As I mentioned earlier, the preliminary design and the project as a whole was presented to the town of East Hampton in June of this year. Following the technical presentation, we will pop open the forum to have comments and questions. There are three ways that you'll be able to communicate with us during the live question and answer session. You can submit questions via email at dotproject41-121@ct.gov. You can also call 860-594-2020 and leave a voicemail. The Q&A box can be used if you're joining us through the Zoom application. We will explain the way to use this function in much more detail on the next slide. This function is only available during tonight's meeting. The project email, voicemail, and Q&A box will be screened by the project team, and the project team is then going to read questions out loud. Questions may be asked at any time during the presentation, but they will be answered at the end. There is also a project webpage where a recording of tonight's meeting is going to be made available. The webpage is also going to include information that was explained on how to leave questions and comments for the project team. That website is https://portal.ct.gov/capital D, capital O, capital T, capital E, AST, Hampton 41-121. The question and comment period by email or phone will be open through October 19th, 2023. Therefore, questions or comments that are thought thought of after tonight's meeting may be submitted until October 19th, 2023 via email or voicemail. Please be sure to note the project number 41121 in your message so it can be routed to the project team. To use the Q&A function, select the Q&A tool at the bottom of the webinar window. The Q&A window will open as seen on the right. Then you can type the question in the text box, click enter, and that will submit the question to us. Next slide. Would like to now introduce the project team. First, from the Connecticut DOT, we have Mr. Bart Sweeney, Division Chief of Bridges, Derek Lassard, Principal Engineer, myself, Francisco Fadul, Transportation Supervising Engineer, and Brianna Ritaco, Project Engineer. Additionally, GM2 is working on the project as the department's consultant liaison engineers. From GM2, there are Rich Armstrong, Program Manager, and Ron Saki, Project Manager. Prime Engineering is the consultant engineer for this project, and Brian Chamberlain is the project manager. Next slide, please. As part of Title VI Civil Rights, no person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. A link has been provided on this slide for additional civil rights information. This is the Title VI notice to the public, which states that the Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes he or she has been aggrieved by any unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with Connecticut DOT. This slide has the Title VI notice to the public in Spanish. I will pause here for a second before moving on to the next slide. I will now hand it over to Mr. Kevin Fleming to discuss the CEPA process.
All right, thanks, Francisco. Hi, everybody. First, I just want to thank you all for attending tonight and showing interest in the project. My name is Kevin Fleming, and I'm a transportation planner here at DOT in the Office of Environmental Planning. And as mentioned, we're here tonight for a joint public informational and CEPA scoping meeting. But what does that mean exactly? Well, the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, or CEPA for short, provides a public process for all of the various Connecticut state agencies to follow in order to identify and review any action that may have an adverse effect on the environment. Now, this process also allows us to evaluate any alternatives that may either avoid or minimize any potential impacts caused by the project. And because CEPA is a public process, a really important component of it is your opportunity to review a project and give us feedback. So your comments here tonight and throughout the entire public comment period, which closes on October 19th, is a really critical part of the overall SEPA process. And I certainly encourage anyone to submit comments that you may have. All right, as you can see here, we have to consider a really wide range of environmental resources under SEPA. And although this isn't necessarily an all-encompassing list, it should give you a pretty good idea of the types of resources that have to be evaluated through the process. We have to look at everything from impacts to cultural resources and listed species to recreational facilities and air quality. And actually, in the case of this particular project, since it involves federal funding through the Federal Highway Administration, we also have to ensure compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Basically, this means that we have to review these types of resources through a federal lens to make sure federal requirements are met in addition to our state regulations under SEPA. All right, so now that you have a really general idea of what SEPA is and what resources need to be considered, what do we mean exactly by the term scoping? As shown here, SEPA scoping is defined as the gathering and analysis of information that a state agency will use to establish the extent of environmental review for a proposed project. So basically what that says, it's a way for us to get information from the public and all the other state agencies so we can determine the proper level of analysis and environmental documentation needed for a project. Certainly we want to make sure our analysis and documentation is commensurate with the level of environmental impact. So this process kicks off when we publish a notice of the project in the Environmental Monitor, and that begins a minimum 30-day public comment period. For those of you who are not familiar with what the Environmental Monitor is, it's an online publication run by the Connecticut Council on Environmental Quality, and it informs the public of all the various state projects that go through the SEPA process. It's a bit of a SEPA clearinghouse of sorts. And for this project, the scoping notice appeared back in the Environmental Monitor on September 19th, and the comment period will run until the close of business on October 19th. As I mentioned, scoping can not only help us identify any potential alternatives, but it also can help identify any specific environmental resources that need to be analyzed in the project area. Now, obviously, as you know, often the local community has a really unique understanding of the project area, including an awareness of any community concerns, issues, or potential controversies that we just might not be aware of. So this gives us a really good chance to feel the pulse of the community. And then ultimately, the scoping process will help us determine if there are any significant impacts associated with the project, and if there's a need to undertake an environmental impact evaluation or an EIE. An EIE is a really detailed and comprehensive document that analyzes significant impacts, and it compares the impacts of the various alternatives considered on a project. Just an FYI, we have to go through the SEPA scoping process for this project because the bridge being replaced is potentially eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So anytime there's the potential for an adverse effect to a historic resource, we have to go through the SEPA scoping process. All right, so just in wrapping up the SEPA portion, here's a really high-level chart of the overall SEPA process. It shows us where we are currently, and those are the boxes outlined in red here. And then it also shows us what the next steps are under the SEPA process. So once the scoping period ends, we'll go ahead and review all of the comments received. We'll then consider any environmental impacts and then determine if an EIE is needed or not. And once that determination is made, the determination itself and the justification behind it will be published in the Environmental Monitor, along with a synopsis of the comments received and our responses to those comments. And then this will inform the public that we have either concluded the SEPA process, or that we'll be doing further analysis in the form of an EIE due to the presence of significant environmental impacts. So with that wraps up my portion on the SEPA process. I want to thank you all for your time, and now I'll hand the presentation over to Brian to discuss the project itself. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Good evening. My name is Brian Chamberlain, and I am the project manager for the design of this project. I'll spend a few minutes describing our proposed replacement structure and some of the details involved with the construction. As previously discussed, the primary purpose and need for this project is the replacement of Bridge 00853, which carries Route 16 over the Salmon River in the town of East Hampton. This will address the structural deficiencies and provide a structure that accommodates safe travel for facility users. And the project location is shown here, and I realize this is a fairly high-level view. The key detail is that Route 16 crosses the Salmon River in East Hampton, close to Colchester. And the main thing I'd like you to take from this slide is the proximity of the project to the East Hampton-Colchester town line. Now here's a closer view of the project location. The bridge is just north of the Gulf Road Bridge Street intersection, close to Comstock Bridge Road, which leads to the Comstock Covered Bridge. And this road also leads to a public parking area and access to the Salmon River hiking trail. Now, before we get to the technical portion of the presentation, I wanted to provide some definitions of the major structural elements on a bridge and an explanation of the numerical condition rating system assigned to the major elements. Now, if you look at the bridge diagram on the left side of the slide, the deck is the riding surface of the bridge. The parapets, and sometimes bridges have open rail systems, help prevent errant vehicles from going off the bridge. The beams or the girders are the supporting structural elements and are designed to support vehicular loads, the self-weight of the bridge, and any environmental loads such as wind, seismic, or snow. Now, the parapets, deck, and beams are what make up the superstructure of a bridge. The abutments and wing walls are the end supports of the bridge. Intermediate supports, if there are any, are called piers. And together, the piers, abutments, and wing walls are known as the substructure of the bridge. The substructure supports the superstructure and helps to transmit loads from the superstructure down to the bridge foundations. Now, please look now at the bridge condition rating of the section of this slide. All state and town bridges over 20 feet in length are inspected at least every 2 years by the department's Bridge Safety and Evaluation Unit. The major bridge elements are assigned a condition rating on a scale of 1 to 9, with 9 being excellent condition and 1 being imminent failure condition. Typically, when a major bridge element reaches a 4 or poor condition, a project is initiated to address the deficiencies, although it may happen sooner. The structure we're discussing tonight is an overall fair condition, with the superstructure being rated a 5, and the deck and substructure are both rated a 6. Now, the existing bridge, represented on this slide by the orange section, is a 2-span structure, approximately 126 feet long, over the Salmon River. The roadway is 30 feet wide, curb to curb, with narrow shoulders. The total out-to-out structure width is approximately 35 feet, 2 inches. And the approach roadways match the bridge section. The existing bridge superstructure consists of concrete encased steel beams with a concrete deck and bituminous concrete wearing surface. The parapets are concrete with architectural detailing to improve its appearance, and we'll discuss that in more detail later in this presentation. Now, you'll notice also that the roadway approaches from both directions are relatively straight. There are no roadway curves through the project limits. I have here a few photos of the existing bridge to help illustrate the site and the current condition. The first is a view from upstream. You'll note one of the existing abutments to the left, and the existing pier is at the right side of the photo, shielded by the tree branch. The other photo is an elevation view from downstream, showing the pier again on the left and the other abutment. These next 2 photos illustrate the bridge roadway approaches from both directions. As I'd previously mentioned, the approaches are relatively straight as you come to and cross the bridge. As we'd said, the site is close to the Comstock Covered Bridge. There's a recreational parking area also close by. And I'll say now, we do not expect any direct impacts to parking access as a result of the proposed construction. Our construction sequence is set up to ensure that there will be no long-term obstructions. It is possible that an isolated construction activity might cause a very short duration conflict, but nothing is anticipated that would reduce or remove parking lot capacity during the replacement of this bridge. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I'd noted that the need for this project comes from the observed structural deficiencies. And let me be clear, the bridge is currently safe. When I talk about the bridge condition, I'm showing things that, if left unaddressed, would lead to an unsafe condition in the future. We're doing this work now so we never reach that point. Now, the first slide shows the deteriorated condition of the bridge parapets. And because of this deterioration, a metal beam rail has had to be installed along the inside face to maintain a safe condition. The other picture shows the bridge bearings at the pier showing signs of deterioration. And you'll also note that the concrete beam encasement is falling off. These next photos show the condition beneath the bridge. The first photo shows one of the abutments. Extensive maintenance would be required to bring it to good condition. The other photo shows another area of the beam with the concrete encasement falling off. And again, these are not issues that currently affect bridge safety, and there is no concern about current use of the bridge. But a great deal of work is required, and if it doesn't happen, at some point there would be more concerns. This next slide shows the total project limits. The proposed structure is represented by the orange shaded area. What we've proposed is a new 152-foot single-span bridge, 2 approach slabs, one at either end, and wing walls to support the roadway slopes as we tie into existing grade. And I'll discuss the structure in more detail in later slides. The project will also involve the reconstruction of the approach roadways both before and after the bridge. The total length of reconstruction will be 820 feet, which includes approximately 325 feet west of the bridge and approximately 307 feet to the east. We'll begin and end the roadway construction with milling and overlay to connect the proposed roadway surface to the existing. And the proposed roadway alignment will be similar to the existing. The horizontal alignment will be maintained. We aren't changing any of the way the road is laid out. It'll still be straight at the end of the project. However, the vertical profile will be raised just a little, about 1.25 feet, to maintain the existing hydraulic opening for the river underneath. Now, all of the highway geometry has been designed to meet current DOT standards for length of curve, stopping site distance, and grades. There's a few other things I'd like to point out before we leave this slide. You'll notice some areas of brown and green along the edges of the walls and roadways. This represents areas of cuts, which is the brown, or fill, the green. And as we've noted, the design is still in the very early stages, and I do strongly suspect that the final grading will be slightly different than what's shown here. However, I wanted to make everyone aware of the fact that some regrading will be taking place. And the final important detail concerns Comstock Bridge Road and the parking area nearby. We will need to reconstruct the roadway at the intersection where it ties into the new road, but access will be maintained throughout the construction. Obviously, going through a construction zone can be a challenge sometimes, but it will be possible to get through. Now here we see the proposed roadway section through the project. As I had mentioned, the new roadway will approximately match the existing. We will provide 2 full-width 12-foot travel lanes and 2 full-width 4-foot shoulders. This matches current design standards and will provide safe width for vehicles. Now here we see the typical cross-section of the structure. Our proposed bridge will consist of a cast-in-place concrete deck with steel girders. It will pave the roadway with bituminous concrete. The roadway cross-section here will naturally match the approaches. We provide 2 12-foot lanes and 2 4-foot shoulders. Now here's a slightly more detailed view of the proposed structure, and I'll just point out a few of the key features. As we mentioned earlier, the superstructure is supported by abutments. Our abutments here will be cast-in-place concrete sections supported by steel H-piles. The deck will consist of cast-in-place concrete and bituminous concrete overlay. The wing walls extend back on either side of the roadway and support the roadway slopes. The wing walls are all conventional concrete walls. We also plan to leave a portion of the existing bridge substructure in place, with the grading extending back from there. And by doing this, we'll be able to minimize the area of disturbance. I'll spend just a few minutes discussing the elevation view of the proposed structure. As you'll note, this is a single span bridge crossing the river without needing any mid-span support. The existing pier will be removed. And as we mentioned earlier, we do plan to leave a portion of the existing abutments and substructure in place. The new abutments will be supported by steel H-piles, and the wing walls run back along both ends to support the roadway grades. And one of the details I'd like to bring up is the new bridge parapet. We are planning to incorporate some sort of architectural system to match the existing structure's appearance as much as possible. In the lower right-hand corner, we're showing a sample of one approved system. We are still in the very early in design process, and some of the details are still being worked out, but the plan for the parapets is to use something similar to what we see here. And I'd like to close my portion of the presentation by spending a few minutes describing the plans for construction. We do expect that the work will require 2 construction seasons. Our proposed construction setup is shown in the following slides. The construction will be done in 2 stages, with each stage of construction allowing a single lane of alternating one-way traffic across the bridge. And traffic will be controlled by temporary signals installed at either end. This drawing is not the final design detail, and the signal locations shown are approximate. I just want to be clear that the signal at the left side of this slide will be set up to control traffic from both the main road and traffic on Comstock Bridge Road. The other traffic signal at the right of this slide will only need to control traffic on Route 16. Now, I realize this will be a bit inconvenient, but we felt that there was no feasible alternative. We took a look at a detour, but the proposed route is approximately 18 miles long. The first stage of construction will begin with the removal of one half of the existing structure and building the first half of the proposed structure. We show a section view in the bottom right corner. You'll note that half of the existing structure will remain in place while the new portion is being built, and traffic will pass over this section of the bridge. At the same time, we'll be reconstructing the corresponding section of the approach roadways, shown here in yellow. Once the first half of the structure is complete, traffic will be shifted onto the newly constructed portion of the bridge and roadway. At that time, the remaining sections of the existing structure will be removed and the new bridge completed. And traffic at this point is traveling on the previously built section of bridge and roadway while the remainder of the bridge is being built. Similar to the previous stage, roadway reconstruction will also take place at this time. And it is during this stage that the Comstock Bridge road intersection will be reconstructed. But again, that road will remain open through the entire project. And as I said previously, we expect each stage is expected to last 1 construction season. And my final slide looks at a possible expected right-of-way impacts. The purple areas on this slide represent temporary construction easements for the contractor's possible use. We expect that the majority of the construction activities will take place south of the bridge. We are proposing temporary access roads at either end of the bridge to give the contractor access to the substructure, but both roads are planned for the south side. We also anticipate acquiring a construction easement to the north, just in case something comes up that requires access from that side. And we realize that most recreational activities are taking place to the north and plan to avoid interference as much as possible. But with a project of this scale, it's best to plan for the unexpected. And again, no long-term impact to the parking area is planned. And at this point, I'd like to hand off to Matt to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Giannakopoulos. I'm a project coordinator with the Department's Division of Rights-of-Way. It's our office's responsibility to acquire the property rights that are needed for transportation projects. And as Brian just outlined on the last slide, the proposed project design does call for the acquisition of some temporary construction easements. So I'm here tonight just to give you a brief overview of the department's right-of-way acquisition process. As Brian also alluded to, we're still early on in the design process. So what you saw on that screen there may change a little bit as the design moves forward. Many property rights that end up being required will be acquired in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes sections 13A-73, 13A-98E, and whenever there is federal money used in any phase of a project, the department must adhere to what is known as the Uniform Act. As Brian goes to the next slide. Once the design has progressed to the point where we know exactly the limits of the easements that we need, are and we're ready to begin the right-of-way acquisition process, each affected property owner will receive a letter of intent to acquire from our office along with a property map, which will depict the exact rights to be acquired. At that point, we'll determine the fair market value of those rights, and that is used to establish an offer of just compensation. That offer is then sent out to the property owner in writing, and right-of-way agent from our office is available to meet with the owner, and they can explain in detail the project, the particular impacts to the owner's property, and explain how the state developed the offer. The owner has a reasonable time to consider that offer and enter into negotiations. Once an agreement is reached, the department staff prepares all the necessary paperwork to transfer those rights, and they'll file a deed and the property map on the town land records. However, if negotiations reach an impasse, in order to keep the project moving forward, the state may acquire rights it needs through its power of eminent domain. What happens in that case is the department files a notice in the local superior court along with a monetary deposit in the amount of the state's offer of just compensation. And the property owner would have 6 months from that date to file an appeal if they felt that the department's offer was inadequate. Now, whether or not the owner chooses to use their right to appeal, the money that was deposited in the court is available to be withdrawn by the owner at any time. So I know a lot of times people hear the word eminent domain, it's like, think the state can just take their whole property for $1, but that's not the case. The department can, and the state can only take title to the property rights that it needs to allow the project to move forward, and the owners are entitled to at least the state's offer of just compensation. No matter how the temporary easements were acquired, following completion of the project, department files an affidavit on the land records, and that extinguishes the easements, and all rights revert back to the original owner. I'll be here to answer questions during the Q&A portion of tonight's meeting, but in the meantime, I'm going to hand it back to Francisco to conclude the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. The additional items that we'd like to note are related to the utilities, rights-of-way, and environmental impacts. Please note that these impacts presented here are preliminary and they are subject to change as design progresses. Overhead utilities are located on the downstream side of the bridge. At this time, there's no anticipated impacts to those. There is a USGS gauge station on the southeast corner of the bridge that will need to be temporarily relocated. As previously mentioned, there will be temporary property impacts associated with this project. Wetlands and watercourse impacts are anticipated as well for the construction of access roads, support of the excavation, and handling water operations. It is anticipated that an Army Corps pre-construction notification, or PCN, DEEP general permit for water resource construction activities, and DEP flood management certification will be required. The bridge has been determined to be potentially eligible for the NRHP, National Register of Historic Places, and we will be evaluating project impacts on any other potential cultural resources as part of the planning process. Under NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, Kevin described previously, the project appears to qualify as a categorical exclusion due to the project's minimal environmental impacts. The new federal infrastructure bill contains certain mandates for improvements to pedestrians and bicycle facilities. Connecticut DOT has therefore recently issued a complete streets policy, partially to that effect. And this project's going to be evaluated under this policy for additional pedestrian and bicycle considerations as design progresses. Next slide, please. Lastly, I will present the preliminary project costs and schedule, which are also subject to change. We anticipate that the construction going to start in spring of 2026 and should last through fall of 2027. The anticipated construction cost is approximately $10 million. That cost is also under revision. Recent revision moved it up to right about $11,500,000. And the project's going to be funded with federal and state funds. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation for tonight's meeting. We will now switch over to the open forum portion for your comments and questions. As a reminder, you can enter questions into the Zoom Q&A window. You can also email the following address: dotproject41-121@ct.gov, or call 860-594-2020 and leave a voicemail, and the project team is going to get to them as soon as possible. There's a question pending, and we're going to be reading it off out loud, and we're going to have the answer provided by Mr. Giannakopoulos. Rights away. I am the property abutter. When should I expect further contact?
Hi, thank you for that question. I would expect that you would receive further contact from our office at some point within 2024. I would expect that to happen somewhere in the spring to summer of 24, based on the schedule we have outlined right now. But it could change depending on how the design progresses. But that would be a ballpark 2024. Thank you.
We've got a pending question. Any night work planned? Brian, do you want to jump on this one?
Sure. As we had said, we are still very early in the process, and so I'm hesitant to say definitely what the plan is. That being said, some of the activities probably make sense to have some night work. For example, when we're placing the beams, we're putting the beams over live traffic, and obviously we'd have to shut the roadway down. It's easier oftentimes to do that overnight to minimize the impacts to the traffic. So some specific activities it may make sense to use night work, but in general, that's not the plan. No, in general, we stay away from night work.
Thank you, Brian. Question pending in the Q&A. Are you working with DEP Fisheries Division for in-water work? Brian?
He says was me. We will coordinate with Deep Fisheries, of course. Deep Fisheries will absolutely be part of the project. We have not started that coordination yet, simply because we're very, very early in the process, but they will absolutely be involved. I guess we'll take the next one while I'm here. Do you anticipate any wetland fill? Maybe. As I had said in my presentation, the fill limits are still being worked on, and I hadn't spent too much time. If there is any wetland impact, it's again very minor. The wetlands were not that close to the areas that we're disturbing at the abutments, so probably not. But it's very early in the process, and I can't say for certain that a small amount might not happen.
Question pending. In the Q&A, it says Comstock Bridge intersection, line of sight improvement.
Well, for the first one, Comstock Bridge intersection, we looked at improving that. We couldn't make substantial changes without impacting the parking lot. And so we will not be changing the current alignment a great deal unless we find a way to, well, we couldn't do it without impacting the parking lot. And so, and our direction was not to impact the parking lot. So there won't be any real change there. Bridge Street and Gulf Road intersection was outside of the project limits. We did not study that intersection yet.
Question pending. The height of parapet affects line of sight from CB.
I assume CB is Comstock Bridge. Is this, does this have to do with the view? Okay, we will absolutely take.
Brian, I believe it's the line of sight from the roadway looking
at the bridge
to the right or
Yep.
left going the other way towards the Comstock. It is the parapet blocking that view.
It's a standard height parapet. Shouldn't, but I will absolutely, we'll take a look at that as we go through the design process.
Question pending, or just a comment? My apologies. That was probably a response to the question, is that Comstock?
I believe so, yeah.
Reminder to everyone that you can enter your questions in the Q&A window, or you can also use the following email address: dotproject41-121@ct.gov, or call 860-594-2020 and leave a voicemail to ask a question. Question pending. Since I am the property abutter, can I have more contact with the project manager to discuss concerns in depth? The answer is yes. If you need to reach the project team, just use our email feature or any contact means displayed that we've mentioned, or you can post your information on the Q&A as a question, so to speak, and we will save that to contact you further. Further info. Just wanted to remind everyone, while there are questions that might be still streaming in, we haven't gotten any more so far. I'll just continue to offer reminders. Just wanted to remind everyone that the comment period will open through October 19th. Should you think of questions after the meeting, you can email those to dotproject41-121@ct.gov or call 860-594-2020 and leave a voicemail to ask a question. When leaving a voicemail after tonight's meeting, please be sure to mention the project number 41-121 so that the question can be directed to our team. Pending question in the Q&A. What happened to the artifacts from the archaeological digs? I will take this question. Department is still looking over the site, and proper measures will be taken to address any findings. Currently, that report's not that has not reached the team yet, the design team. Any findings will come later. Appreciate the question. Another reminder to everyone, the recording of this presentation is going to be posted to the website, Connecticut DOT's website. And that website, I will paste it now into the chat feature, not the Q&A, but the chat feature for everybody's benefit. We'll give it a few more minutes to capture further questions or comments. Couple more minutes just in case some folks joined us late. One last reminder, to post questions, you may email to DOT project 41-121@ct.gov or call 860-594-2020 and leave a voicemail to ask a question. You can also type questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom so we can answer them here tonight. So far, there are no questions in the voicemail feature and no questions in the emails inbox. Okay, 30 more seconds. You can enter questions in the Q&A, send us an email to the project email, or call 860-594-2020. There is a pending question. Will there be other meetings like this? There will be opportunities for the public to comment if you wish to do so. For this particular event, the closing date is October 19th, to either send us voicemails or to send us emails as part of this particular event. But if you need to contact the project team for information or for comments concerning the project, go ahead and reach DOT project 41-121@ct.gov. I will paste that in the chat feature, or actually the Q&A is more appropriate. I'm not able to save there. I'll save it in the chat feature. Couple of notes to close. If you're watching on YouTube, we will have this recording on the project webpage that I pasted before in the chat feature. And you can watch the entire presentation over tonight's presentation, including the question and answer session. At conclusion of the comment period, the report of meeting is going to be drafted for this presentation that will include all questions and answers during the meeting and during the comment period. There's no further pending questions. Looks like that's it for the questions tonight for everyone. Would like to thank you all for attending, for your participation in tonight's virtual public info meeting. We appreciate your time, input, and questions. As I said previously, we'll be monitoring the phone and email address during comment period, which is through October 19th. A link to the webpage has been posted to the chat. We're looking forward to a successful project here in East Hampton. Thank you again. And take care and good night.